This week we'll be discussing our financial education and strategies, solutions, action and recovery, as we always do, for going forward and making better choices for ourselves and for the younger generation coming up. In terms of our African identity, we discussed last week about only using Black as the political term. So I've now resorted to saying African Black people. And, I'm talking about African people worldwide. I wanted to start with a question for everybody. How was your financial education growing up?
So financial education for me, with regards to family, the only example I can think of seeing and understanding how it worked was Susu, the saving system that a lot of African people do, where you sort of rotate the savings. So you'll all collect it. So one person will get it 1 month, then you'll do the same again. The next person will get it the next month, and so on and so forth. So that's a piece of financial education I got, as well as investing in property was definitely another one, and how to sort of gradually build up, maybe just sort of seeing it happen instead of actually what the actual mechanisms for how you do it. And then that was pretty much it. There was no, I remember at school there was no formal learning about how to advance financially in the world. It was just sort of, you'll pay rent and this is how you do it.
So in terms of your maybe teenage or adult life, what education did you now start to gain yourself, and how did you navigate those avenues?
Not really until much later, because I think when you have parents that you can rely on, and maybe that's just a personal situation, parents that you can rely on, it's really not, for me anyway, it wasn't really like, sounds very spoiled, it wasn't really a consideration, in all honesty. So when I got to uni and it came to like student loan, that was like the first piece of like big money and grants and stuff. It was just, I've always been good at saving. So I always knew to sort of put some aside. But there wasn't any sort of understanding really for me about shares and all of those sort of things, because in all honesty, those sort of things I do find quite intimidating, of like, okay, how do you do it? And how do you navigate it without making like losses and things like that? My mum, I think, was definitely the one. She always had some money squirreled away somewhere. So yeah, I definitely learned it from her. And it's a good discipline of that you don't spend everything. And my dad definitely said that too. Said you don't just blow all your money on things. Always make sure that you put some aside.
Sometimes the protection bubble that our parents may give us basically means that we go on without the actual education, because our parents doesn't have it, doesn't necessarily mean that we have it as well, because if they're not, what happens when they're not there, so
well, I think a parent's dream, sorry to, if this is my last one, I think a lot of our parents' dream is that we get into middle class jobs where we don't have to sort of maybe hustle as much, and our income is very fixed, it's very stable, and that's it.
True, but I would say that even if we get to those positions, these skills would still apply.
In terms of family structure, I had a good foundation at home in terms of financial literacy. My parents knew how to make money, how to hold money, and how to do all of that. But on top of that, it's not just like the saving, because saving doesn't make you rich. It's investing. That is what they actually taught me. And then when I started, so I did 1 year uni. I'm a dropout of business school, so I had a little bit of the basis that I needed in terms of what is the difference between the different type of markets, the different type of economies and all of that. And then even though I dropped out to pursue my career, I always kind of had an interest in financial and business literacy. So I kept up that type of stuff, because you don't need school for necessarily to learn concepts. Also in school, the basic were given to me in school, because we have in our education system both in middle school and in high school, 3 mandatory years of finance, economies, and along with civil studies.
Not much of a financial literacy household. My mum was good with money. She was a good saver, and I definitely didn't inherit that from her. I was, as soon as I get money, how do I get rid of it as fast as possible? So even though she would say certain things, my parents, I think they thought they could teach us by, throwaway comments. Oh, if you don't save, you won't have anything later. I'm like, okay, I'll deal with it later. So it didn't, sort of entice me into saving. So it's those kind of comments, the reverse psychology thing, it didn't work here. It didn't sit me down and tell me why it's good to save, and an emergency could happen, or you could have more for later. And that kind of really just, summarized my childhood in terms of money. I got my first job really early, 16, at a functioning hall in Chigwell. And once I got my first pay, and I spent it all in JD, my dad was like, oh, you were supposed to give us some money. Like, you are telling me this now? I spent it already. And just, why didn't you tell me when I got the job and explain? So it's either explaining too late, explaining in part, or throwaway comments. And that just didn't work for me. And school didn't have any sort of learning about that. So I learned at university the hard way. I've always had jobs. I've always just spent my money, haven't really had a clue in terms of, not having a clue, didn't have the inclination to save, to invest. It was, I worked hard for it.
So what was it that you learned at uni?
Uni, I learned, boy, if you spend all your money, you ain't going to be able to pay for it. You ain't going to be able to get the things that you need. So I had a job throughout uni at Tesco's, and I got shares in Tesco's because they said they'll give us discount on something. I just kind of signed a form, heard about it somewhere, somehow, that it's good, got my shares, and that's it. But I always had a job. I became better with money once I realized, that there was no rainy day fund. I couldn't just call my parents. My parents have always had quite low earning jobs. So I had to just trial and error and learn that way. And I eventually learned biggie when I got older and got my own place, and I was just into debt and credit. I just thought debt was an extension of credit. So I had to learn the hard way, that way. But it's helped in terms of inform the decisions I make today. I'm still a spender. I still am, but it's refined.
It's fine as a balance.
And it's not unto not pay rent and not pay bills, but I do like to spend. And I make provisions for that. It's controlled and refined. And I'm understanding my character. I can't just go and buy the shopping. I need to just say, oh, if I see something nice, let me make provision for that. So I budget and factor that in. So I feel good, because that helps me feel good. So good learning curve.
That's fair enough. Balance, isn't it? Everything's about balance. Nothing's wrong with being a spender, just you can't go, one extreme isn't better than the other.
So my contribution on this is, I don't think that financial education was absent from our home. I think it was a case of they taught us their approach, and their approach was extremely safe. It was, we're African, we don't take benefits, we do not rely on debt, we work hard, and we play it safe. We do not take risks like, investment shares. We weren't taught investment shares, and I really do believe that came from a place of where that was not their approach. That's not what they were looking. So they didn't teach that, because maybe they could have taught us all angles of it so we can make our decisions, but the values that were taught to us were very safe. There was large emphasis on education. You get your education for your security. You save. As Ellie said, Susu was we always knew Susu was there. This is a reference point. We were aware of it at a very young age with this. It was explained to us. I think there was an education of sorts. However, it was their belief, it was their approach to finances and savings. And so for me personally, I'm quite, I've always wanted to know how I can get more money faster and quicker. And so that was very different from my parents. So in that regards, I wasn't equipped to earn how I wanted to. And it's very different from, I don't necessarily believe in hard work. I believe in smart and effective working. Our parents, they would work from morning till morning, you know, and what you couldn't really see the fruits of their labor. Yes, they had property, yes, they had land, but they wouldn't live frivolously. They didn't have the big cars, but they were earning, and they believed in hard work. So when I went to university, before I went to university, I had a job, and I remember my dad would say, I want you to focus on your studies. I don't want you to earn money. I don't want you to get distracted. So this is why I say that I really do believe they taught us their approach, their belief. And I still went ahead and got a job. I was working from the age of 16, even though he didn't agree with it, you know, and then I worked right through university, you know, but then with their values, there were certain jobs that I didn't go for. So, and again, that's why I say they taught us what they stood for. So it was because of your ambition, do not go for certain jobs, target other jobs so it can look on your CV. So whilst I was at university, I would be working at banks. I was in the financial sector because I wanted to learn more about this. So yeah, so I really do think values were taught. But in terms of investment, shares, stocks, no. We didn't have a sit down talk, and I think it's just because that's something they didn't do themselves. You know, investment in land was taught, property was communicated to us, and that's what they did. Did they have credit cards? No. So they wouldn't have taught us, like I've taught my children how credit cards work and the pitfalls, but because they didn't believe in this, the most we would hear is like, we just don't go there. My first sister, she went through university, she didn't obtain student loans because my parents didn't believe in it, you know. But then later on down the line with the younger ones, they realized that actually the student loan is actually a good debt. So they didn't actually understand that there is good debt. And I think that's what a lot of big time business people understand, that there is such thing as good debt. It's in capital in your business. But our parents would use hardcore money that they've raised and put that in the business, but then that doesn't ensure business growth.
So yeah, that just a few points that Kate raised that made me think about the other parts of people's personalities and how that affects finance. Because I do remember the women in the Susu group, they would, because it's almost like you pool your money, and then they would go and invest in things like fabric or importing things from Nigeria, and then, or jewelry, and then flipping the money that way. So it was all very safe, but they did do investment on that sort of community level. I also think that a thing that affected how they responded to finance was religion. Because there are there are many types of Christians, but within the Pentecostal community, there are the ones that are dedicated to this sort of humility, and that really impacts on the finance, where it's almost like you should just be above pole in terms of how you like flex with your money. And that when you reach a certain level of wealth and it being very visible, it's almost akin to sort of pride and that sort of thing. And then there are the wealth Christians who they go to every seminar, every conference about God give me money, God give me money, God give me money. So there are two sorts of approaches. And I think my parents were definitely in the sort of the humble crowd. So I think that definitely impacted on how they taught us finance. Because when I think about how my mom talks about her childhood in terms of finance, my grandmother, she had a store and everything. She was an entrepreneur. Her dad had, I think it was like a printing press and manufacturing. So they were industrious people. And they did like to flaunt their wealth, and they were wealthy people, even going back to her grandfather. So I think definitely what impacted on how we sort of moved financially was the religious aspect of it.
The person who taught me a lot was my mum, and it wasn't really by word. It was more so by watching her.
Mhm.
And so when I say by watching her, it'll be in the way she always had this notebook where she would kind of like jot down like numbers and dates and things like that. So I really just learned from my mum, and I think the most thing I learned from my mum is always kind of saving for something. Even if you are a spender, you will always have something left for yourself and for your household. So those were the two main things that I learned from her. And it was never, I feel like she taught me, she knew that she was teaching me, but she never had to say anything, because she would just do it right in front of me. So it was very practical. I was always kind of there. And from both parents, land has always been spoken of. So having land back home, and not just in the sense of having land for money, but land in terms of it's ours and it's to go through the generations. That's really what I've been taught in terms of growing up myself. Yes, I went through the whole spending as a teenager, and a bit through uni. I think I got to a point, it was second year of uni, where I went to the bank and I just said to them, "Can you remove my overdraft?" And the man was looking at me so weird. He was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yeah, just take it off." So from then on, I kind of I never really wanted to be part of anything that looked like it would lead you into some sort of debt that you didn't even want to in the first place. So I think from uni growing up, I've always kind of kept that in mind, to just whatever I'm doing to do with finance, don't lead yourself into something that you will then regret later, or that you'll have to spend a long amount of time having to pay back. Where I'm at now financially, I would say that's to do with just learning, self-teaching, looking at things, and reading articles or attending webinars, seminars, and just learning.
I just wanted to discuss these two terms of how maybe you've seen it in the community, or what it means to you: the hood rich and the poor man mentality. What does that look like in our community?
When we're speaking about hood rich and all of this, considering that most of the people that I know don't live in a hood, but mentally at times we have this block mentality, where everybody kind of thinks in a certain way based on culture, based on I would say like movie culture, American culture, our own African culture as well, and the environment that you're raised in terms of being immigrants. I've seen a little bit of hood, so I don't have hood rich, because when I used to live with my parents, we saw like the bottoms, like, and then my parents got a little bit better, things got a little bit better. But even when my father started making good money, we wouldn't feel the money. We would just eat the exact same thing we were eating before. Never taking a holiday. So he would, and I think that seeped in my character as well. Like, he would spend money for some certain things, like buying a lot of plots back in Ghana, building extravagant houses in Ghana. These are assets. You can sell them, you can make money, so you're not actually throwing money away. And while we were living at home, when I was living at home, they wouldn't really spend that much money on trying to impress nobody. People kind of clocked that we had money, because like he would start buying like 4 cars at once and park them in front of the house, because he was about to ship them maybe to Africa. So people started clocking that the money was coming around, but he wouldn't necessarily drive those cars around to impress anybody, because it wasn't in his in the way he was as a person. And one of the other difference that I noticed growing up between, for example, me and him, is that he was already established with his wife. So a lot of the things that come as a youngster, in impressing the ladies, in impressing your peers, was already washed down and gone, because he didn't really have to do that. For him, it was more important to build legacy, leave something for the kids. It was 5 of us, so for him, it was always about working. And I heard somebody saying that they didn't believe in working hard. But for example, in terms of my parents, they felt like working hard and smart at the same time is very important if you actually want to go ahead, because obviously the race route is a little bit hard, to be honest. And if you want to jumpstart and get a little bit ahead, at times you kind of have to have very hard and strong beginnings, and maybe you can relax down the line, but at times a little bit tougher there. So in terms of poor man mentality, one of the things that my father tried to teach me was, in general, in the community, to be poor does not mean that you're making this amount of money or this amount of money, because we had people that were factory workers. And let's say, let me talk about my age mates. They were factory workers. They still live with their parents, and they would save most of the money because they were still driving dad's car and a humble car, and they would save most of the money and don't really spend much money. But in society, they would be lower class. They were middle class or anything like that. They were lower class because of the type of job they were doing. Somebody else at a specific point of time maybe was going to get a better job, better paid and everything, but he would spend most of the money on everything that he was running around about, and would actually be poor because there was no money in his pockets and everything was out and about just for display. So poor is not necessarily a condition of your salary. That is something that even economically doesn't make sense. Is in terms of your ins and outs and how much is left. So what is left determines whether you're poor or not. So that is what my father tried to focus a lot, and that's why at times I might sound and come about as stingy, but then to balance that, for example, in my upbringing, was really important to donate and give out and help and make sure to do the outreach to other people. So that is something that was trying to balance in it.
Like you said, the being poor is more a mindset than it is a reality of your job or even where you live. Because when we say hood rich, some people, they don't live in the hood, but they are hood rich in their mind, you know, because of, and you see it in what they choose to spend on and their lack of money management, I would say. In terms of saying that mindset, for example, wherever they live, be it they're renting a room or it's a council house or wherever, there's no growth in their mind. So they're living somewhere, they've got a roof over their head, and they're happy with the bare minimum. So now they will start to be buying extravagant stuff to fit in that house, you know, and still not having the mindset that, no, I should save my money to change my house or my living situation. Rather, they'll be in a what would maybe be a shack with a HD flat screen TV and everything like that. They've got designer in their closet and stuff like that. But where you live is not saying much for your financial stability.
I think with both terms, it comes from a place of victimhood. So the hood rich is, well, the originals were, we're in the hood, we live in tough, let's make it out the hood. Okay, very American, I'm sorry. Make it out of the hood and then flaunt and stunt and make sure people know that we, however you remember us growing up, we're not that anymore. And the poor man's mentality also comes from that sense of, well, woe is me, some of it. Woe is me, can't get out of this, I'm trying, I'm working hard, I'm working smart, nothing's quite connecting for me. And just the whole victimization really sort of plaguing some of us African and Black people in the West. Not in Africa, back home they're industrious, they're entrepreneurial, they're about to go get it. But it feels like we owed something. Oh, I never had in the West, it seems to me. And so both of these things are problematic. But in terms of Britain here, in terms of our Black British history, we've been about here since the 12th century. I mean, I've been to the Museum of London Docklands with the girls and the Slavery Museum. And you see in the paintings from centuries ago, and there's black people in regalia. And I even asked the guys, like, oh, so we weren't slaves before? And he was like, no, like, you know, before the slave trade, we were around these these bits doing things, and some of us as a part of, you know, the upper classes. So I think the victimhood, I say that because the victimhood mentality comes from, well, we came here, they kept us low, they kept us oppressed. Yes, that did happen, but there was also plenty of black people from, like I said, the 12th century who were doing great. So I think we need to shift that mindset. It's not a victimhood thing. Yes, if there's systemic racism, yes, there's systems in place and structures in place, but those types of mentalities, the two that you've mentioned, I think for me comes from victimhood. I'm trying to just stay away from that. We're not owed anything. We did come here. Yes, it was tough. But, you know, especially nowadays, we have an opportunity to not just be on Instagram, flaunting rich kids of Instagram, this, that, and that. It's just making, the media just making us all want to just, you know, flaunt. And again, now, like you were saying, some people are flaunting when they're living in really meager accommodation, but they got a £300 bill. I don't know what you want to do with that bill. I don't know, you're not flipping it, you're not doing anything with it. But, you know, you've got that belt proud around your waist. So it's, victimhood is not a great place to start for either of the two types of mentalities, I would say.
Okay. No, that's a really good point. Sometimes the dynamic between Africans and Caribbeans sometimes gets quite heated, because sometimes the Africans feel that a lot of Caribbeans, they're stuck in the victim mentality where, yes, this happened to you, however, you're letting it block your progress because things have happened to everybody. But whether it affects you moving forward, part of that is on you, you know. So, and that's one thing that the Africans have, that we move. Do you know what I mean? No matter what happens, we move. We must progress, because what else can we do?
Okay, so there's a lot of things to unpack, and I'm just going to start from the place of, I think when we say poverty, it's not just a mentality. It's a lived experience that it affects you down to your health. So when you are poor, you are prone to almost a permanent state of stress. That affects your ability to think. It affects your ability to make decisions. It affects how you literally see life, and it affects your life expectancy. So you will have a shorter life because you live in a state of prolonged and permanent stress, and that is it's real. And for British people, the fact that we've seen a huge jump in terms of people's finances from, like, let's say the 70s to the 90s, a really big part of that was having the health service. Because if you think about people in America, you could be working non-stop and one illness could completely decimate all of your finances, because it might be £400 and you just can't afford that. And remember that somebody said that there was a study that came out that most, it was for America, but I think the same could be said for the UK, that most working class people cannot absorb a surprise cost of £400 that it would actually decimate them and they could become homeless with that. So when you have somebody like Jeff Bezos, who you could literally steal £500,000 of his money and he would not notice in real time, that just says that poverty is not just a mentality, it's a very real thing. On top of that, I think the difference between, and we've touched on this in previous panels, the difference between a lot of Caribbean and African mentalities when it came to this country was that Africans hadn't gone through the system of, many Africans hadn't gone through the system of programming, which happens in state schools. And I remember the difference between going to a state school and going to a private school. The state schools are preparing you to be a worker or less. They're really preparing you for a very meager existence. So I remember when we did any sort of financial training, it was all about this is how you budget for your shopping at Tesco's, this is how you organize your rent money, this sort of thing. It wasn't about aspiration in any type of way. And I think African people, when they came here, because many of them their living situations are very different. So if you're in the village, you're very aspirational, you know what you've come to get. If you were from the city, you were probably already quite wealthy. So you're not coming with that sort of struggle mentality, whereas when you are part of the fabric of this country for a really long period of time, there are silent ceilings. So even when it comes to hood rich and the poor man mentality, when you get to a level of middle classness, no amount of money can still make you feel middle class, because the middle class has silent signals in terms of purchasing what events you go to, what music you listen to, that almost undermine, which is why they have the whole new money, old money. So they've got their own version of hood rich and poor. So they have that sort of keeping up with the Joneses thing. And when they're in the Black community, I feel like because we have dealt with so much adversity in terms of how exactly do you long-term plan when you do feel in real time that society is conspiring to end your life. Some people, their reaction to that is, well, I'm going to enjoy it as much as I can right now. I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm not advocating that as a strategy. I'm just saying that that mentality, I can see how you can get to that point. For other people, it's a part of imposter syndrome. So you might have worked really hard, invested well, you're now in those spaces, and you are made to feel like you do not belong there. So they do buy into luxury to sort of make themselves seem legitimate. And interestingly enough, I just Googled the term, and the first thing that came up was JD Sports, a lifestyle brand called Hood Rich that's it's established by a guy in the UK. And the actual way that they define it was, it spends flamboyantly but does nothing to improve one's living condition.
Exactly. And
But that's what I'm saying. If you feel like your living condition is not within your control, then you will spend because that's the only thing that you would feel is in your control.
What do we think about that? Can you change your living bracket?
Yes, you can. You can fall off the bracket, or you can go up. I have a sibling. We're not in the same bracket, and we're not even in the same, if you want to keep a social class. Yet we have the same education from back at home. We have the same upbringing and everything. But then his choices, which are personal choices, are totally different from the ones that I would. And they actually go hand in hand with his character. So your choices is also something that it is on you. Cares to be a little bit more careless, then all the type of choices that he makes then obviously have impact in his financial life as well. And it goes down to character and then the choices that you make. Coming down to the poor mentality and all of that, I said earlier that it's not just about the bracket that you're in, and it's correct that Ellie says that there is a version of the middle class hood rich, but it's appearance. So if somebody's middle class and they make 90K a year and they spend 89 in expenses, along with, for example, buying this, buying that, even if the quality of the life that they're living seems to be better, if they spend all of their money, by definition, they are not anything else than poor still. Because if you have money, it's based on the amount of assets that you have, and money, obviously, that you have behind if anything ceases at the time. So you, being middle class, if you spend everything that you have, it's still hand to mouth, nothing else than that. So that is I'd assume like a hood rich condition in the middle class. And it's something that impacts us. But I don't necessarily think that it always has to do with like the culture, because people can come out from very bad situations and they just have a lot of money. They don't know how to handle the money at times. And that is not necessarily always because of, I don't know, I need to impress people. It could be that they're buying stuff for themselves. They're not even trying to impress people, but they just don't have the mentality that this money is not secure, because they don't watch long term and all of that. And these kind of stuff come down from education rather than necessarily what your drive is. Because these people that are making 90K, if you make 90K, you have some type of skill job that means that you have some type of brains, but brains does not mean education. So education is something that needs to be fed to people regardless of this class that they fall in, or the bracket that they fall in terms of money. There is that. And then when it comes back to the whole asset thing, what we put our focus on is also different. So the difference between me and my dad would be, for example, the fact that he spent a lot of money in Africa to buy things to make him comfortable for when he retires. Because we were born in Europe or raised in Europe, it's a little bit different than them, because most of our life it's here.
Yeah.
And I remember when if I didn't have, I don't know, the fruit juice that I wanted in the fridge, and then I was helping my dad with finances, and then I saw that my dad finished the year 300K, I would be pissed.
Yeah.
Like, how is this guy sending 300K to Africa and I didn't drink that juice?
Yeah.
I'd be pissed. But this is because his resources were to be split between Africa and here, not necessarily because of an investment in, but because of mentality that was his retirement place. So that was important for him. So hood reach and all of that for us might be a little bit different compared to our parents as well, for example, because they didn't really have to stand on people as much as maybe we would do based on the culture that we have around and all of that. And another thing that somebody else said about the struggle mentality, it's true that our parents came, especially if they came maybe from a village or other stuff, they were grinding. We, to some extent, had a little bit more privilege than them, because theoretically, most of our parents took us a little bit ahead, and now we are taking the journey a little bit more ahead so that our kids can have a little bit more, and so on. Them grinding also took away time from the standing. We grind and we do all of that. We have way more time in our hands to stand, and that's why you go back home and maybe your father, your mom tell you you don't have a job. That's what you want to do. Yeah. That kind of stuff. That comes from what we consider, and I think it goes down to culture and the situation that we are in at the moment. I assume when I came to the UK, I was homeless. I didn't have much, and I had to rebuild everything. But I don't think I ever was poor mentally, because for me, the resources, the skills, what I know how to do is valuable everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And even if I didn't do a very technical job or very skilled job, what is important is if you don't have the basis of saving, regardless of the job that you're gonna have, you're still gonna end up poor.
Yeah.
But if you have the basic of saving, investments, and when I talk about investments, as somebody else earlier was saying that the parents were playing it safe and all of that. Being raised in the West, we have access to Google. There's no way you shouldn't know some certain things. Like if you've ever heard of it and you dismiss it and you don't go and do some type of research, that is on you, because you owe yourself the best type of education that you can get with the tools that are given to you that your parents didn't even have. So that is very important for us to always feed our minds with if you don't know what the stock market is, and as the first generation immigrant that your parents come around, they don't know what stock market is and they wanted to play it safe, it's totally fine, because they're still building and paving the way for us. But where we are now, you can't say I'm playing it safe, so I'm not even going to research it, and I won't know what it is. And then 10 years down the line, the victimization, I'm going to say they held me down. Nobody can hold you down from the stock market. Like nobody. All you need to is to register and then put money in it. And somebody was saying about people having they always had Gucci, they had this, they had the flat screen. And then you talk to them about petty things, and they will never have money for that kind of stuff. Yet they'll go and take loans, or they'll go and take a lease on the latest car and pay the next car for the next whatever amount of car. And this is something that is still with us. When I moved here, one of the things that I didn't want to spend loads of money on a car and then get stuck and I live for the car. I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
When I bought my car, a lot of my friends were like, dude, you should have bought this car, or should have bought that car. That is missing the aim though. It means that in their minds, they're still living for that car, which is like a 5-year span, and then you're gonna live for the next car, and then for the next car, because that car is gonna get old anyway.
Yeah.
So that is knowledge, though. It's knowledge. It's not just them being poor, because they make money as well, but they don't have the knowledge. So they just live hand to mouth in a middle class situation, and 10 years down the line, they're just gonna keep doing what they're doing, and then they're gonna complain about the rat race.
Yeah.
That you should be able to get out if you put down the basis, you know, to improve your situation.
Right. There's a book that I went to. I don't know how many of us know the guy called Julian Hall, he does entrepreneurs for children. So basically helping them become entrepreneurs. And there was I think at the children's fair that we went, there was a 11-year-old girl, I think, who had written a book with all financial terms. And I was flicking through even some of the terms I had not come into terms, I had not come across yet. And that would be a fantastic book that everybody should have in their household, because we said a lot of us, with parents, we would help out, we would do this, but we didn't know what certain things would mean.
Yeah, with the poor man mentality, I think one of the things as well that keeps people poor is well, within that poor mentality, is not believing in using what you already have. So in the sense that it could be like, you see people nowadays, even like right now, just kind of building a catering business by the culture food that is just cooked at home. You know, it's not a massive thing, but it's something, and it's a start. So I think some of the things that can really keep us behind is just by literally not looking at what we have that's right in front of us. We're in a time today where, you know, whether it's African fabric, whereas African art, African this, or black this, black that, it's really hitting off. So I think not knowing what you have, or not even trying to attempt to use it, or trying to make something out of it, can still keep you in that mentality. Kind of goes with what Miss Ellie was saying in terms of like being the imposter. And I think it's one of the things that I've seen is, if you're acting like you've made it just in the space that you're in. So it's kind of like you can't go any further, so you act within where you're at. Like, if I can't get out of where I am now and become first somewhere else, let me just act first in the lowest place that I am right now. So that's what I see a lot with the hood rich mentality. So,
well, some people, when it comes to their spending habits, they might not spend financially, but they do become the community safety net. Okay, so the community safety net is basically when your community is seeing that you've made it to a certain level where you seem very comfortable, then suddenly everybody who's got financial issues, or they've got run into some sort of financial trouble, is suddenly drawn to you. And that can be a huge drain on finances, especially for people that don't understand how to draw boundaries within, and sometimes it's family that test those boundaries the most, but it can also be just the wider community in general. And then as soon as you start to enforce boundaries, then suddenly it's just like, oh, you think you made it, look at where, and then you get this really horrible thing where it's almost like the community turns on that business or that person, and they want to tear them down, because it's almost like you weren't meant to get that far. That sort of thing. Also, just to touch on the point, about the children, about is there any age to start teaching them? Children's programming actually has the highest level of adverts of any programming. You see, if you watch children's programs, you see more adverts, and they are being trained in hypercapitalism from a very, very young age, and they're being trained literally to pester their parents into spending. So I remember my parents, when I was younger, there was no adverts. We didn't see one advert. We drove past Toys R Us so much that it closing down really had no effect on me whatsoever. And you train your children in that sort of that discipline, because bratty children are usually children who have pestered their parents into buying things, but they've been trained to do that because that's the messaging that they've gotten. And for a lot of adults, the only lesson that they've gotten really in finance is hypercapitalism. So spend, 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 spend. So that's what they know to do. Just to touch on the next point, for me, wealth is land. That just because that's something that can constantly bring you just different forms of security, whether it's housing, food, farming, agriculture, whatever it is, it just provides just different types of security. Yeah.
Okay, really good points there. Very important about the discipline. Again, sometimes the parents are going off the religious influence, where your religion teaches you not to be materialistic and stuff like that. But those are good morals to have, and it's important that children and adults learn discipline, because growing up, oh my goodness, first of all, I was born in the time that they were in church and we weren't watching TV, so it was videos, so we didn't have a lot of access to adverts. But then even when we would go shopping or we did start watching TV, I learned how to just look and say, that's nice, and move on with my life. I think it's important to teach yourself that you don't have to have everything, and there are certain things that you can go without, because it's not going to be forever that you're going without them. But for now, you're teaching yourself those things so that you can enjoy the benefits maybe later. We'll come back onto the wealth stuff, because definitely owning assets, whether here, back in Africa, the Caribbean, or wherever abroad. Also, as African Black people, we don't have to be restricted to owning things in Africa or the Caribbean or where we live. We can go beyond that.
So about the adverts, I actually feel like having a lot of adverts can be a very good place to start with discipline. Like, not necessarily having a lot of adverts means that you come out a spoiled brat, right? And that is down to your parents teaching you not to lean that way or not. So I wouldn't be too much worried about having a lot of adverts, because, I mean, your kids are going to be exposed to all sort of things. So if they don't see it on TV, they're going to see it from their classmates bringing it up to school and stuff like that. So it's more about the discipline. I believe that most of the habits or devices that you can have take a lifetime to build, and then it's really hard to drop them, because you need to do a deprogramming what was in before and then reprogram something else. So it's really hard to change habits that way. So I feel like there's not really a too little age to teach your kids to money and this kind of stuff. I had a little bit of change money that my parents used to give me on the weekends. So I knew that if I want to afford an ice cream, I need to save my couple of peas. Otherwise, I'm not gonna have an ice cream. And then you start talking to your brother, and you're like, you know what? We could have 2 ice cream, one today and one tomorrow. We use your money for the ice cream, and then we lick it in 2, and then we buy the ice cream tomorrow. So we're gonna have, and it's petty things like that, but it's helping you to organize yourself later on. And as my parents used to give me the type of allowance, like the allowance ain't not like, it was like coins. Do you understand me? And I found myself that I was like 18, and I didn't really have an allowance. So what I used to do is, like, if I know that I can take the bus from point A to B to go to school, I'm going to take the bus from A minus something, B minus something, and walk the rest of the route. So I'm going to have some change money in my pockets. It was a little struggle to have a little bit of money to spend on time, but it kind of builds your character in terms of if I save from here, I can then do this little thing. The training should be early, and in terms of what they can understand. I've seen that at times there is, especially nowadays with social media and all of these things, there are parents that teach their kids a bunch of lingo or a list of things, but a kid doesn't have any type of substance. So it's not about necessarily teaching the kids. You need to learn about 50 type of different economical principles, but you don't know what they mean because you've never really applied them. And a lot of times, I believe that a lot of you were speaking during the call that you made some mistakes that rectify some other things that you later on did right in your life. So those mistakes are the experience that you need to be able to understand. In other parts of the world, they have the minimum requirements of economic basic and this kind of stuff in education. And I feel like the way they break it down is very related to the age bracket that you are in at that particular point. America, somebody was bringing up the stuff that people have money to live on, but then when they have a bill that is £400, they can't survive. And if they have a medical emergency, they die on.
Yeah.
But yet, if you go to the medium American and tell them, do you think that this is right? They will adore and die for capitalism. Because that is not training, that is no knowledge, that is indoctrination. They've been indoctrinated like that since childhood. But when you come to Europe, for everybody in Europe, it's more regular that, the health system should be, we should have some type of basis to not let anybody die. But when you go in this comment section of Americans talking about, they'll be like, yeah, but you guys are paying so much in taxes. I'm like, taxes are, like, we all hate them. Nobody loves to pay more taxes. But the basics that we all agree on is like, we should have the right of an education, the right of this, the right of that. And this is indoctrination that gets pushed down to them. We don't have that much of that indoctrination over here. And we inherit a better system in terms of social economy that they don't have. So it's true what Ellie was saying, that they would get kicked out on the curb by a $400 bill, but this is because they are being taught into using a lot of credit, and that goes with capitalism, because they've been taught and indoctrinated that if they want the economy to run, they need to spend a lot. If you go to other countries, I believe Italy was among the #1 countries of where people own their house, and they were the highest among the savers. And it's because people after the war were so scared, because they were coming as losers. They were so scared of not having anything, and they had to go back to the fields and work so hard that they were really very minimalistic in terms of consume. That makes it all different. America won the war big time. Just keep using money and let's just bring money. People that, when you go right now that we had the whole COVID situation, people don't know what it means to be in a bailout. People don't know what it means. When they hear I'm receiving money, they don't know what it means on the long stretch, where the money is coming from, what they are. And it becomes difficult then to be like taking other decisions that are a little bit more on the community. We're like, what should we do as a community? Let's take away Black people. In general, I feel everybody thinks a little bit that the world is going to shit. Like, society is a little bit crazy. So why would you think the Black people, which is just a chunk of them, wouldn't have that still the same type of trend? A lot of other people are ignorant on a lot of topics. So when you then take the topic of how do we save us, and you put it in the middle and expect a democratic vote, you could come up with a rubbish solution. If everybody's ignorant about the topic, we're going to go for that rubbish solution and harm ourselves, which could be what type of politician we vote in Africa, what type of regime we should have in Africa, what type of money we should spend on in Africa. There's never progress if there's no education behind it. So kids should be taught, but not indoctrinated. Because even in Africa, we do indoctrination. If you come from a country that was very communist, they teach you almost like venerate and adore your leader. And then if you go to Angola right now, like the leader and the daughter were just pretty much raping the whole country over. But people were just like, go and see the events that they do. People over there, like, oh my goodness. I'm like, wow. Like, and that's indoctrination.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And one thing that I wrote down was that there is no, the answer is there is no age to start teaching good financial practice, because from the young age, a lot of people teach materialism. And just back on the point that Ellie mentioned about the owing mentality, that is a lot of the time to the detriment of our community. Sometimes we don't, rather than celebrate those who are doing well and helping them further themselves, some of them already have the mentality to help their community. They're not running from the community, but it's like the community acts like vultures and acts like entitled, because they don't give credit that what you're doing for your community is enough. They come attacking, saying, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing that, and well, you should be doing this, and if you don't do this for me, then you're not doing what you need to do for your community, which is wrong. And we need to stop doing that, because there are many ways to help the community. And sometimes we don't want to enable certain bad mindsets in the community, and oh, I can do whatever mistakes I make because Mr. So-and-so is going to give me money and he's going to be there for all my F-ups.
We've lived this. This is reality. And it was explicitly told to us that possibilities are endless. Yes, the obstacles are there. However, we can overcome them. When my parents came to the UK, I mean, people can vouch for where they started from. You know, they didn't really have any firm plans to stay in the UK, so they really started off with nothing. You know, and that wasn't because their families back home didn't have. It was more of they made a decision to leave Nigeria because one was from a Muslim family, the other was from a Catholic family. So they made a decision to not take anything from the families and go out on their own. So when they came with nothing. And now we can see, fast forward till today, what they have been able to build. I remember we started, from what I can remember, we were in a 2-bedroom flat in Bermondsey. And very small. The kitchen was, you couldn't have no more than 2 people at the same time. All the relatives that came over, they'd pass through that apartment. So cousins would live there. This is a 2-bedroom apartment. Aunties will stay there, then they'll move on, you know. And then it was, for me, I just remember it was a stepping stone. They went from the 2-bedroom apartment in Bermondsey, then they went to Camberwell. It was always a stepping stone. And what they achieved matched what they were communicating to us. The message they were communicating to us is, if you want it, you can get it. And they lived that and they achieved that, to the point whereby they acquired a property that was worth whatever, a commercial property. So just looking from where they started from to what they achieved, and they're still building. So there was growth, there was steady growth. And I think it came from their you know, the work ethic, and we've touched on it before, the African values they came with. A lot of these countries, America, UK, they've been built on the backs of, I'm not talking about slavery, I'm talking about when migrants come over, they are really the backbone of the economy and the country. And our parents were part of this. You know, they contributed, they didn't take from, you know, I can't speak of this generation, but our parents at that point, they didn't take from the benefit system. They paid their taxes, they worked, even if it was the menial jobs, they worked. Sorry, he's laughing at Tinga Tinga. Yeah, so I think they had very strong work ethic. They were, specifically for my parents, they were a power couple. I mean, this is a trend now. It's like, oh, power couple, but this thing it was nothing fashionable. It's hard. There was a lot of, you mentioned discipline. There was a lot of discipline, you know, work ethic. They had shared values. Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, they said the reason why they work as a team, as a power couple, it was a shared values. And that's something that I can say that has helped them achieve what they've been able to achieve. They were committed to their vision and they were committed to their goals as well. I think I'm only speaking from our experience, from what we saw, from what I saw, where they tripped up was, I think Debbie mentioned it was sending money back to Nigeria to family members. I think a lot of Africans in the 80s and the 90s, even now, but I think more so then, they were almost, it was almost, there was an emotional blackmail. There was an emotional blackmail. It's like their worth was linked to what they could bring back home. You know, they would work. I mean, I read a story just the other day. A guy was doing a cleaning job. He sent him money back to build a home and also money for the upkeep of his family. After 10 years, no home has been built. And that's a cleaning job. We know how hard it is in the UK, you know, and I think this was something that my parents, they always sent back. And I think that was, I know this is being recorded and is going on record, but I really do believe now, on hindsight, I think that was a mistake, because the lack of gratitude, the lack of understanding, the lack of appreciation. And I know I'm on record now for saying this. As their children, this was taken out of what we had. You know, there were funds allocated, and what can we show for it? There were some, I think Jay said, there were some Africans that used their money and built back home. It's not that our parents didn't have enough to do that, but they put their responsibility of supporting family back home higher than that of building. And I think that would be one aspect of their financial decisions that I would not agree with. I would not support. I was looking at the contribution of Diaspora to African countries. Nigeria is very significant. So Diaspora contribution to the Nigerian economy in 2018 was $25 billion. So this is 6.1% of the GDP, is extremely significant, to the point where the Nigerian government acknowledged this. It's enough to say that the diaspora should have a hand in molding and deciding policy, influencing policy in Nigeria. The diaspora contribution is extremely significant. You asked, is there a way that we can do it properly and effectively? Yes. I think all those years when they were sending money back home, I think it should have been managed. It shouldn't have just been this fountain of money that was just sent across. I think there should have been accountability that we are going to build this complex. We are going to invest. And I think that's something that if the diaspora were keeping tabs more, I don't know if there'll be like an effective way that we could monitor and manage the money that we're sending back. I think that would have been all that money. That's a significant amount of money. I think it would have been more effective to the development and the growth of Nigeria and other African countries, rather than just sending it across and they're doing parties and whatever with it.
Well, I was going to ask that the reason for sending it as well, is it sending it to help people with bills, with clothes, or is it sending it to you because I want you to find a house, or, you know?
If they, so for instance, the story, I remember when we were quite young, they will send, I don't know if you remember those barrels, those drums, and they will send things from Weetabix, and they will say, oh, they only wear Clark shoes that we wouldn't even wear. They would request Clark shoes, they would request Marks and Spencer's chocolates. So they had very specific requests. They had very specific tastes. And I've heard this from my Jamaican friends as well. And I think there was a mentality that we have it good in the UK, that it's easy. But then we can't blame them fully, because I think the diaspora, we upheld this, we didn't correct that notion. They didn't want to, you know, some African migrants are really struggling and suffering, and they don't want to say that to the families back home, so they don't communicate this. So they're going along thinking that everything's all good, they've got this endless pot of gold that they can send back. But I do think there's a more effective way that we can send back and manage it for the growth of African countries, and even for our investments back home as well.